they seem to give us more insight into the coaching boxes this year than I've heard before. Either that or the coaches have developed Tourette's overnight, because it was like there was a constant dialogue coming from a lot of the coaching boxes. And I think it was actually Dr. Mark Kovacs who tweeted about it and was basically saying this overload of information is not good for the players. And actually, as coaches, we actually haven't worked out how to be experts in the field of on-court coaching now that you're able to speak. You two as coaches, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Are we, as coaches, are we guilty of overcoaching, or are we hearing too much coaching going on? Is that just the norm? Are we not allowing the players to work things out themselves?
I mean,
okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Freddie. I mean, for me, I'm always wary, and this I haven't always been wary, but now I am, and I know that one of the people who mentored me as much as anybody was a guy called Paul Dent from your part of the world, I think.
Yeah.
And I remember when he was my tutor on level 5, and he said, like, what he said to me right at the start of that was, you need to cut down on the white noise. There's too much white noise all the time, and it stuck with me all the time. So I think that the lads who I coach, I think they will tell you that I'm not by any stretch blowing my own trumpet here, but I try and say as little as possible. And I read a couple of other coaching theory books and that kind of thing. One thing I always one piece of advice I always took on board was don't say anything that you can't write on a post-it note, because if you go past that, it's too much. And so I'm always wary of not just saying everything. I do think, however, there are certain situations where if the match is flat, then you need to create something. Say your player is a bit flat and they're behind or something, and there's not much going on in the match. You need to try and create something. So then you've got to say a little bit more. But I think you've just got to be wary of it not just being white noise, of just constant noise and information all the time. And I do agree with Mark Kovacs on that we've got to be careful of it. I don't think I've necessarily seen too much of it, but I think it's difficult because I always wonder the other way. I have my way, like I just said, if I don't want to say too much, but then I often think, am I actually giving enough here in certain situations? But in particular in the Wimbledon final, I was very quiet. I mean, they're too far away to hear much anyway, but in terms of, unless I see something that I know will definitely help, I will tend not to say it. What I was interested about with that, and I got into a couple of discussions on Twitter about it with a few people, and it was after Drapes had played Sinner in the semi, and I was fascinated by what Trotz is saying, and Trotz is a friend of mine, so I don't want to. I hope I'm not being biased on this, but I do consider Trotz to be one of the very best coaches in the world. And I was fascinated by his dialogue, which I thought was excellent. I was watching it thinking, this is really good coaching. Yep. But he was actually getting a bit of stick off people on social media because he wasn't saying the things that they think are coaching. So Trotz was giving he was telling Drapes, calm down, breathe. He kept saying breathe a lot, which is very good coaching. But I'd seen a lot of people going, this is just rubbish. He's just saying breathe to him, give him some advice. And I think what people think that coaches say, now it's mic'd up. I think what they think that they've seen the coaches talking to the players a lot and that kind of thing, but it's not mic'd up. I think they're giving them detailed tactical breakdowns of how to go about playing the match. It's not that, because you're getting maybe 7 seconds between points. You're trying to find something simple that will affect the match. You're not giving them this idea that they're not problem. If we give them, if the coach is allowed to talk, it stops them being problem solvers. You can't do that. It's like when I play, and I might give, one of the matches last week, I gave Harry. It was in one of the mixed matches, I think maybe the second round, and I've just said to him, like, just cover the wide, Harry. I don't think she can go tee. And that was it. That's as complex as the tactical stuff gets. And he probably knew that anyway. But I think that's an interesting one, how people have got this idea of what the dialogue is, and it's not the same as what it was. So now we're getting the fans going, well, this is just pointless. They're just rambling. They're not saying anything.
Yeah, I think a really good point, Carl, and I think in line with me, and I think one point I'd like to make, and you've made it on the Wimbledon final, on those big courts, you're a long way away. It's very different. There's a very different type of dialogue that you have. My observation, and I agree, I thought Trotters with Jack Draper was excellent. You know, it was said with authority. You know, he knew his player. Jack was obviously struggling physically. You know, there was a very clear also game plan that he was pointing out to him that, you know, he needed to shorten the points. He needed to serve volley a little bit. He needed to be coming forward. You know, he wasn't going to be winning that match from a physical standpoint by having long rallies. Thought it was excellent. Flip-flop to then Tiafoe's box. And it felt there was so many people shouting things out. And I sometimes can find this as well. There's so many people shouting things out, like you demand, you know, what, or whatever it might be, that actually, if the coach who wants to make a point, it's already difficult in those big stadiums. But now, as the player, all that the player's hearing is just noise of a lot of voices.
Yeah.
And I think that the master, and I actually, to share a little bit of, I went through this with Gabby and Erin a little bit during the US Open, because it can also change depending on how they're feeling, right? And the situation they're in, or, you know, are they on their period? Are they in a position where they're struggling with boyfriends? Are they, you know, there can be different elements that's going on in their world. And because there's quite a few people often in the box for the girls, and we're kind of close. Sometimes Gabby doesn't know who's saying what to who. So we actually developed I think where there's two things where there's either just a bit of emotional coaching, which could happen from anywhere in the crowd, right? You know, here we go, Gabby, next one, you know, you've got this, those type of things. But if it comes to actual tennis coaching, we actually had an agreement that she would give me her eyes to let me know she's receptive to hear something, you know. And what I've had to ask of that is, don't just give me your eyes when you're panicking. You know, because that's also not good as a coach, you know, and it's like a last ditch. And then obviously sometimes, like you say, sometimes you've got to try and change the energy. But I think it's very, very interesting what we're seeing, and I like the insight. I do think, like you say, the tennis fans are maybe expecting a little bit more, but it is very hard for the players to hear that and hear what's being said on the court. So clarity of message, and almost, if you don't get the eyes of the player, it's almost impossible, in my opinion, to give a real strong clarity of message, because especially on those big courts.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had a point. Sometimes it's not about the message. It's about being there for the player and just reassure. That's what it is. I mean, sometimes my players ask like pretty, I would say, stupid question, but they just want a clear, some kind of response so that they can feel comfortable. You know, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing? Yeah, that's all it is. Sometimes it's being reassuring to the player, and like Cal says, it's not about what you say; it's what effect you have. So I find this very difficult, courtside. You know, am I saying stuff because I think one of the big problems with a lot of the coaches is that they're obviously not in the middle of the court or the match, and they can't influence the outcome. So they get sort of a panic state where they feel like they need to control so much because they don't feel comfortable letting the player do it. So then they just overload and scream and talk and talk and talk and talk because they're not comfortable sitting down and just letting it happen. So therefore they need to deal with their own situation by talk because they're not comfortable with the quality that's on the court or what or the comfort with what they're saying. And like I'm the Davis Cup captain. I'm sitting courtside. I've been doing that many times. I've had a coach a lot. It's overrated as well. Like the amount of times you can go make a player go 180 is very few times. It doesn't happen much. You can kind of do a few things like Cal says, cover the tee, or like change your serving a bit to the backhand, more to the tee, like minor stuff. You can. It's very rare, in my opinion, that you really change a match completely around from coaching, because it's still difficult to do in the
Yeah.
heat of the moment. management, and you get caught up in old habits in this. And especially if you then have to deal with the emotions of what just happened and then listen to stuff. I find it really challenging to find out what I have to say that is potent and has an effect, like Cal says.